The Green Frock Coat, A Ghost Story of Romance by LeBron Keener. The city was noisy. Cars, trucks, and a few taxicabs were racing by me, blowing their horns in a desperate attempt to reach some other destination. People were walking too fast for my liking, some looking down at their cell phones, and some were bumping into me. Programmed machines they were, just as programmed as the phones they were carrying. Programmed to eat a cheap deli sandwich and be back behind a desk in under 30 minutes. Sirens, bells, and whistles sounding within the thickness of the hot urban smog. It all turned my head into an explosive device awaiting detonation by the pressure. I knew there was no escaping this city of hell. An alleyway lay ahead. It wasn't an escape, but maybe I could get out of the way of the urbanites before they trample me. I just need to stop and gather my senses. With the alley a short distance ahead, I seen the beginning of a cobblestone path within it. Wondering how I ever overlooked such a quaint little way within such a noisy city of boisterous urbanites. Even on my evening strolls when the hubbub of the city was dwindling, I never saw such a charming alleyway as this one. The old brick and rock walls around me were free of graffiti and profanity. There was no trash blowing around and no vagrants or panhandlers. There were no winos sleeping in the alcoves, and all the noises of the city were gone. At the end of the alley, which was merely 100 feet, was an antique store and curiosity shop so quaint and cozy that I thought surely I could find peace and quiet there. I opened the old wooden door, and a little bell rang. "Hello, dear," said a rather small old woman with hollow-cheeked face. She was standing behind a large counter of mahogany and brass. "Come in, my dear. Would you like a cup of coffee? It's fresh. And please help yourself to a scone or two." The shop had a mixture of aromas ranging from musk to rose petals mixed with the strong coffee the old woman was pouring. Other than her voice, the only other sound was the ticking of the huge clock in the window. I began to walk between the cluttered aisles where all kinds of antiques lay on shelves, hung from the ceiling or just lay upon the floor. Items of every kind from times gone by, pictures of people obviously long dead, their clothes, hats, and suspenders, figurines in crystal that once adorned the stately homes they lived in, gathering dust and love no more. In the back of the store, I turned around. I could see the old woman no longer. It was deathly quiet back there, and the lights were very dim. It was almost like this strange place had never been set foot in. Then something caught my eye. It was a coat. A green Victorian frock coat adorned with brass buttons. Oddly enough, I was drawn to it, not for its beauty, but it seemed familiar to me. I closed my eyes and went back to a much simpler time. I went back to a time before the pleasures of science conquered our minds with gadgets to make life easier, yet so incredibly hard. A time with no noise from television, automobiles, or radio. I went back to a time when evening entertainment was a book from a shelf or a card game in the parlor. The sound of a horse-drawn carriage passing by on the street outside, a street now dimly illuminated by a row of gas lamps on posts outside the tall, ornate windows of this stately Queen Anne home that I remember so well. The fire glowed joyously behind the marble hearth and brought warmth to an otherwise cold sitting room where I go in my mind to escape the world of today. A man outside still plays his violin just as he did all those years ago in the gazebo on the other side of the street. It was a lullaby to all the townsfolk in the evening hours of the sleepy town. My senses were at rest. All my tension was gone. The quietness was amazing. I looked up from the fire and away from my thoughts and noticed the room I was sitting in. It was so ornate and beautiful. The chandeliers sparkled. The velvet curtains shimmered in the light. The man with the violin continued to play music outside, and many people were with me in the great front parlor dancing to the music's sweet, endless melody. Dressed in the most beautiful dresses, the women all curtsied and smiled, while the Victorian gentlemen bowed and tilted their top hats in gratitude. And that's when I saw him. He smiled at me. His eyes glistened like the crystal in the corner cabinets of the parlor. He was a young man, maybe 30, with golden blonde locks of hair and a mustache goatee combination of the same hue. "Could I have the pleasure of this dance?" he asked. I smiled as he took my hand in his and led me to the middle of the floor. He led as we danced around and around to the sound of the old man's violin as he played the happiest melody I had ever heard. I looked into his green eyes as he smiled at me. I was enwrapped in his masculine beauty. His blonde hair, tan skin, and beautiful green eyes. His top hat and green frock coat with buttons of brass. I studied him for what seemed like hours. His perfect form, the gentle way he caressed me as he led our dance, and that entrancing smile that was meant for only me. No words were spoken, just endless stares as we spun around the room. I was there. I was in his arms. The man of my dreams in a world unbeknownst to me until now. The room of crystal, gold, and velvet was a blur. All I could concentrate on, all I cared about, was him, those green eyes framed by his tan, smooth features, and that smile. His firm, unyielding hands were like heaters as he held mine within them while we danced, spinning faster and faster as the music played on, holding him tighter as he continued to smile down upon me. Suddenly, the music stopped. His smile went away as he looked at me in sadness. The beautiful blonde hair began turning to gray. His skin, once so tan and vibrant, began to turn ashen, and his smile was rotting away. As his handsome features turned to dust upon the marble floors, I found myself on my knees, embracing a skeleton in the middle of the parlor, adorned in the green frock coat with the brass buttons. No fire in the fireplace, no music outside. It was just a cold, damp room in an old abandoned Queen Anne home of what used to be Victoriana. I was alone. I looked up from my thoughts, and I found myself in the middle of the aisle, laying upon the floor of the antique store, clutching the old green frock coat in the antique store on the cobblestone path. "Are you interested in that old coat?" the old lady asked as she stared at me suspiciously. Getting up from the floor, I continued looking at the old green frock coat with the brass buttons. "Yes," I responded. "I'll take it. It belonged to someone I met a long time ago." The end.